Good evening, everyone. This is Subhash Gatade. I welcome you all to the 20th lecture in the Democracy Dialogue series organized by New Socialist Initiative, a new left ideological political platform. Our guest this evening is Dr. Vinod Mubayi, public intellectual, scientist, and activist. We are really thankful to him for sparing time for us. He'll be speaking on partition of India and on the challenges to overcoming its ill effects on all sides of the borders. His talk will refer at times to the past and the missing misdeeds of the present, but focus mostly on possibilities for the future. Dr. Vinod Mubai was born in Lahore in the then United British India and was raised in post-independence Delhi. He did his PSc and MSc from Delhi University, received PhD in physics from and taught at Cornell University and was a research fellow at TIR Mumbai before joining Brookhaven National Laboratory, New York. A member of the American Nuclear Society, the American Physical Society, and the American Association for the Advancement of Science, he was also a consultant to agencies of the United Nations on energy issues. He joined INSAF Bulletin as co-editor in 2004. He has been a keen observer of socio-political events in India and has been close to progressive groups fighting for human rights issues and the cause of the downtrodden. His book, Where is India Headed? An historical critique, which chronicles the contemporary Indian history during the last few decades, has also been translated into Hindi. Before I invite Vinod to share his views, let me add that this lecture, which is focused on partition, is our second lecture in the series. As most of you know, the first lecture on partition was by Professor Parvez Hudboy, the leading intellectual and physicist from Pakistan. And next month we will have Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed, the famous Swedish political partition, and he has agreed to deliver the lecture. Friends, please welcome Dr. Vinod Mubai. Vinod, please go.
Thank you very much, Subhash, and I thank New Socialist Initiative, Subhash and Ravi, for inviting me to talk in this democracy dialogue series. I feel very privileged and honored to address uh, a forum in which such distinguished scholars like Irfan Habib and Romila Thapar have spoken in the past. I'm not by profession either a historian or a political scientist. Rather, I'm just a concerned individual who has some personal links to the subject matter of this talk. Partition split us up. Can we live in peace as neighbors? Of course, I share these personal links with many thousands of others who were also displaced by the partition and the events that followed. Now, as I begin talking, I remembered a quote by noted poet Allama Iqbal. He once wrote, "दिल से जो बात निकलती है असर रखती है." A translation that what comes from the heart or what one expresses sincerely should have an effect. I just hope whatever I have to say can live up, even if partially, to Iqbal's criterion. Now 75 years have passed since the partition, and the answer to the question, can we live in peace as neighbors, at least as far as India and Pakistan are concerned, the answer to that would seem to be no, or very doubtful, because 75 years have seen waves of hostility wax and wane, including several hot wars, cold wars, and so on. Now, all these events appear to be a legacy of the two-nation theory that caused massive uprooting of settled populations, and especially in the Punjab, where I was born, brutal violence and killing of hundreds of thousands of Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. I do not plan to discuss the two-nation theory today because a few weeks ago, our good friend Dr. Parvez Hoodboy from Pakistan analyzed it in some detail in this very forum, and the video of his talk is available, I think has been circulated by the organizers of this forum. So I only wish to record or to put on record that Savarkar, who is hero worshipped by those who rule India today, proclaimed the two-nation theory in 1923, well over a decade before Jinnah adopted it as his credo in the 1930s and 40s, and then led to the events that followed in 1947. How I have planned this talk is to give a few relevant personal perspectives to the events of the partition, some of which I witnessed, and after the partition, in terms of some reminiscences and personal experiences I went through that served to illustrate what partition meant and continues to mean to those who went through it. Now, I was born in Lahore in 1941 and was around 6 years old, about to enter first grade of school there, when the city was convulsed by riots and disturbances in July and August of 1947. Schools were closed, etc. We had to sit at home. We were living with my maternal grandfather, Rai Sahab Manornath Razdan, whose house I was born in, who my grandfather had also been born in Lahore, as I learnt later, the same year as Mahatma Gandhi was born in Porbandar, Gujarat. So he was of that generation. Although I don't remember the exact day, but it was sometime in late 47 that I have a vivid childhood memory that I would like to relate. And our neighbor, who was a Muslim family that belonged to the Tiwana clan, one of whose members used to be Chief Minister of Punjab, I believe in the 30s and 40s, he came to one morning, and I was standing around with my grandfather, and he was imploring him, "Ke Rai Sahab, please go to Amritsar for a few days until things settle down here." In the local language, he said, यहाँ के नौजवानों का कोई भरोसा नहीं है, कुछ गलत बात कर बैठें तो हम पछताएंगे, because riots were going on and homes of people were being set on fire, etc. So My grandfather, in a phrase I have remembered because it was repeated over the years, he was very puzzled and he said, राजा बदलते हैं, प्रजा तो नहीं बदलती. Rulers come and go, but the people stay the same. He couldn't understand why he was being uprooted from a place that he had been born in and lived all his life. And I think for part of that generation, this whole version of trying to understand what became ethnic cleansing, the phenomena of ethnic cleansing as we understand it now, was something that was incomprehensible and remained incomprehensible to him and to those of his generation. Now, this uprooting was accompanied by a sense of dispossession, losing a home, possessions, neighborhoods, streets, shops, a whole pattern of life that could not be easily replicated wherever one had migrated. This phenomena occasioned a sense of bitterness that was heightened considerably by the violence that the extreme brutality of the separation was involved as events transpired in those months from around March of 1947. I'm talking of Punjab because that is my personal experience, and probably to the end of 1947, events happening on both sides of what became the border. So these killings and brutality were symmetrical in the sense that Hindus and Sikhs killed in what became West Punjab and its environs, and Muslims killed in what was East Punjab and its environs. They happened, I don't know the numbers, a lot of books have been written about it and so forth, so I don't have to go into details, but roughly we can say the same rough number, approximate number suffered on both sides as the millions and millions were involved. Now, many of those displaced, like my grandfather, were partly compensated in material terms, even though they had lost land and property, since that had happened on both sides. So my grandfather eventually was given some place to live in Old Delhi, which was vacated by some Muslim who had gone to Pakistan. And these exchanges happened over 2 or 3 years. Land and property compensation was given to those who had paperwork, and I think many teams of officials were involved in doing these exchanges. So partly this material compensation was there, and I'm sure his home in Lahore was given to some Muslim family too. It doesn't exist anymore because I went back there about the late 90s, early 2000s, and it has become a commercial area. No residential area is there. Now, paradoxically, or one could say even dialectically, the sense of bitterness at this dispossession, at this migration, is also frequently accompanied by a sense of nostalgia or longing in the minds of the migrants and their descendants for what was left behind. This is actually not surprising if one thinks about it in some detail. Dialectics teaches us that two opposing sentiments can coexist at the same time, and which one is primary and which is secondary depends on the situation or context in which they are expressed. I will relate another personal experience in a little bit that illustrates and highlights that particular fact. In the meantime, what we can say is that the two states that were created in the aftermath of the partition have remained creatures of hostility almost from day one, as it were. And very unfortunately, the hostility seems to have become even worse in recent years and shows no signs of receding. Now, this talk is not the place to theorize on the role of states and the broader civil society they ostensibly serve. But one can observe historically that the interests of the state and the interest of civil society can diverge considerably depending on a number of factors, particularly which group or coalition of groups controls the state and its institutions or exercises a dominant power over its functions. So we have the phenomena of majoritarianism, of fascism, and so on, in which state power is exercised in a way that does not meet the interests of all of the citizens in which that state is located. Now, I will come briefly to this issue of the interests of the state versus those of civil society insofar as the creation of India and Pakistan is concerned in the context of the partition and the legacy of the two-nation theory. But before that, I wish to relate another personal experience that concerns the dialectical relationship I mentioned between the opposites of bitterness and nostalgia that coexist in families, in individuals, and in society at large. In March of 2006, I took my mother, then 87 years old, to visit Lahore. She had often spoken of it to me, a wish, a very, one can say, a wish very close to her heart, to visit and see once more the city where she was born, grew up, went to school and college, got married, and had her 3 children before partition, which intervened, and she wanted to visit while she could still walk before it was too late. So it so happened at that time, March 2006, a fortuitous, one can say, circumstance, that the marriage of the daughter of close friends of mine who were connected with SAFMA, the South Asia, I think, Free Media Association. Not sure it exists now, but it existed then. And through their good offices, we were able to get my mother an Indian citizen a visa to visit Lahore, to visit Pakistan, and believe it or not, that was whole event was accomplished in one day, which seems almost miraculous to conceive of at this time. Now, during our visit, one morning we were staying with our host who lived then in the cantonment area of Lahore, the modern city. We decided one day quite spontaneously to visit my grandfather's old house in the walled city, where my mother had been born and grew up, before my grandfather had rented it out apparently sometime in the middle 1930s and had a house built in the more modern area of Lahore on Beedon Road, where I was born. So one morning we just decided, along with our hostess, who also happened to be a noted videographer in Lahore, and who was the mother of the bride whose marriage we were attending, that one morning we started out for this walled city area, which behind Wazir Khan Masjid, the gate. The walled city has all these gates that have got names, and this gate was Wazir Khan Masjid gate. And a video was made of at least part of the visit, and we have that. Now, since there has been minimal architectural change in the walled city, I think that was some by plan in the by the administration in Lahore. We were able, with some little bit of help, to locate my mother's birthplace. And in fact, we even located the house where she had been born, which had not changed that much, and her memory kept rushing back, and she would point out, features that she remembered from 60, 70 years earlier that had not seen change. So, for a totally unscripted visit with no preparation beforehand, to say that the visit was a big success would be a huge understatement. The people living in that house, in that particular place where she had been born, turned out to be descendants of the people who my grandfather 70, 80 years earlier had originally rented the place to. And they were showing us the old rent registers and his handwriting and their receipts, and but they would not let my mother go after a few years. After a few hours there, what they said was, to see, you have come after 60, almost 60 years. At least stay 60 days with us. And they would not just let her go. So that was, for an unscripted and visit, that was the extent of the feeling among people who were complete strangers, but who, on hearing of her life, reacted in a way that they became like old family, almost friends, and they just would not let her go. They kept asking her about how it was in 80 years earlier, who lived here, what did the place look like, and she kept, as her memories returned. So the whole visit, and it's part of it, is captured in the video and so on. Now, but this dialectic of bitterness and of fulfilled nostalgia pursued her on her return to Delhi in a week. She was so full of enthusiasm over her welcome in Lahore, and she went to see her then elder brother, 90-year-old, who was 2 or 3 years older than her brother, who also lived in Delhi. He had been a medical doctor at the original Gangaram Hospital in Lahore, which was the original and still has the same name, incidentally. And then, after partition, he was a medical doctor at Gangaram Hospital, which was set up in Delhi. So, she was full of enthusiasm, trying to tell him what she saw, the response she got, etc., etc., this welcome and what Lahore looks like, which was a home to them, before partition occurred. But I was there, he would refuse to listen. The bitterness had not left him. All he said was, सब कुछ छीन लिया, अब क्या बता रही हो? So they took everything from us. Why are you telling this to me now? And it showed vividly the contradictions that exist among the siblings of the same family, among those, these feelings that coexist, and that probably happen in society as a whole. And so I thought I would just put this out as a way of reflection of how reality works for those who were displaced. There is nothing unique in my story. We read every day of people who visit and get welcomes in Peshawar or Rawalpindi or some other place that they were displaced from. So that brings me to, as it were, the next phase of my talk, which is that as I think about it, I don't have much hope that the hostility between the two states that we view right now can end anytime soon. And the advent of nuclear weaponry in both countries 2 decades or so ago have added, as it were, a terrifying uncertainty to this relationship between the states that have fought 4 wars since their creation. Now, Pakistan's history and evolution as a state where the military has exercised decisive power for most of its existence was described in some detail by our colleague and friend Parvez Hoodboy in this forum itself few weeks ago. So I do not wish to enter that, that discussion. It's already there and is available. Now, India began on a somewhat different trajectory when I grew up in Delhi in the 1950s. But in the last decade or so, especially with the advent of the current regime, it has morphed into something quite different that presages and gives us no hope to get out of this continued hostility. So, as mentioned in the outline of the talk that I circulated earlier, while the past is commonly understood to be prologue to the future, it also behooves us to imagine a future without all the baggage of the past and focus a little bit on future possibilities. And this is what I want to talk about for the remainder of what I have to say today. Now, a lot of experience over the past 70 years, 75 years has shown that despite the most fraught and tense relationships between the two governments that rule the states, common people of South Asian countries, whether in the diaspora or while visiting each other's countries, as the example of my mother's visit showed, are able to establish friendships and bonds quite so easily and without any problem at all. To me, it shows that despite these 75 years of separation and so forth, that the long standing cultural and linguistic bonds that were established and existed over millennia, over thousands of years of living together, they cannot be extinguished just by propaganda from governments. It seemed to me that the relationships between people, between common individuals at all kinds of levels, are the hope, at least to me, in these perhaps waning years, to hope for establishing peace in the region. And we need to take whatever efforts we can, we need to make whatever efforts we can to bring people together, learn from each other on issues that affect us and that have a potential to change our future. So, what I want to talk a little bit about is the hope that has been generated by people-to-people contacts. And in this, I have been impressed for the last few months since I heard about and joined this group, South Asia Peace Action Network, SAPAN, the founding of which I will ask organizers to show a few slides that I sent, states that minimum common agenda is reclaiming South Asia to a future of peace, and that includes people in South Asia as well as the far-flung South Asian diaspora that exists all over the world. Now, I was invited to SAPAN by one of its very committed founders, Pakistani journalist Beena Sarwar, who may have joined us today. She had told me she might join this forum for a little while. She had some other, and I will probably ask her to make a few comments after I've talked about SAPAN a little bit. Now, it was established in last year, I believe in uh, after some brainstorming session uh, in 2021, when people in the diaspora, South Asian diaspora, and others came together, and the call of Sapan is for soft borders, visa free travel between countries, etc. And they have established uh, themselves as a group that holds, to me, at least from what I have observed, some promise. So I would like the host of the talk to show 6 slides that I selected from a presentation that was given by one of the members of the South Asia Peace Action Network, Dr. Fauzia Deeb. And could you show the first slide I've selected, please? Thank you. So, in her presentation, she said that the goal of this organization is peace in South Asia beyond the ideological barriers. It's a coalition of peace activists and organizations working towards freedom of trade, travel and tourism in the region, people-to-people contact, especially between India and Pakistan, and soft borders or visa on arrival for South Asians in each other's countries. These are some goals. The next slide, please. Can you show? So, the background is reclaiming South Asia that was given by late I.A. Rahman, who was president of the Human Rights Commission of Pakistan and a very distinguished individual for peace between the two countries. And the goal was to support the objectives of SAARC, which has never really functioned because of Indo-Pak hostility in the last decade. Now, various principles and ideals of peace, justice, democracy, human rights were articulated over the years by visionaries, Nirmala Deshpande ji, Dr. Mubashir Hassan, Kuldeep Nayyar, I.A. Rahman, Nikhil Chakrabarti, Asma Jahangir, Rajni Kothari, Iqbal Ahmed and others, who are all unfortunately departed, but their visions gave the impetus to form this particular group. And I believe that the people who were instrumental were luminaries like Dr. Amartya Sen. The founder is Beena Sarwar, Kanik Mani Dikshit of the Himal magazine, Lalita Ramdas, founder of Greenpeace India, Ramu Ramdas, former chief of the Indian Navy, Admiral Ramdas, Khushi Kabir in Bangladesh, Raza Rumi from Pakistan, founder of Naya Daur Media and more. So these were the people who gave an impetus, and from what I understand, and please show the next slide. So the founding charter of this group says to promote the welfare of the peoples of South Asia, improve their quality of life, to accelerate growth, social progress, human rights, cultural development, promote and strengthen collective self-reliance, mutual trust, and so forth. In fact, to strengthen cooperation in South Asia on matters of common interest and bring individuals, people together to serve these goals. Next slide, please. Can I have the next slide? Okay. So, what I liked about it is that this group has set up a number of subgroups, as it were, on issues that are of common interest and overwhelming interest in both countries, and in fact all of South Asia. So I've listened to group on road and highway safety, which is coordinated by a lady from Jaipur. And road and highway safety, we know that in our countries, people treat it very callously. Every aspect. It's a factor of daily life that affects millions. Now, solidarity with Sri Lanka, climate change is, of course, a major issue. Rights of the incarcerated, especially, we have this pathetic uh, problem of fishermen from India and Pakistan who happen to stray across whatever is considered as a border in the ocean, and then they are detained by the navies of the two countries, and they kind of vanish into prisons in both. There are hundreds of Indians in Pakistan and hundreds of Pakistanis sitting somewhere in India who languish in jail for nothing except trying to make a daily living. Is that a way for civilized states or neighbors to behave? One can ask this question. So there is a group on rights of the incarcerated, on the COVID-19 pandemic, regional health care. We face all the same problems in these countries. So what I liked about it is that if we set up groups of concerned citizens from both countries who unite to discuss problems that are common problems, hopefully we don't have resources like governments have, etc., but governments, we have seen, mainly try to score political points in meetings rather than trying to get together to solve problems. Next slide, please. So they have organized a number of monthly events, and like a Kabir festival, road safety, labor rights and democracy, music, Sufis, art and artists, human rights and equalities, gender violence, and a number of such issues are talked about, come up, and they have a meeting like every week or other week, and to discuss progress on some of these, to bring people together and so forth. I think we have one more slide. Can you show the last slide, please? So the current plan is that the way forward is to begin with instituting soft borders and visa-free South Asia or visa on arrival, allow freedom of travel to each other's citizens, ensure human rights and dignity for all citizens, including religious and ethnic minorities, women, children, and other marginalized communities, as well as cooperate in all areas that relate to public health, culture, legal reform, education, environment, climate change, water issues, demilitarization, denuclearization, etc. These are all goals that we can accept because they are universal goals. And at this point, if Bina is in the audience, Bina Server, who invited me to join Sapan uh, a few months ago, if she is there, she would like to say a few words about about Sapan. I would welcome it. So I call on Bina, but she may not be among.
जी डॉक्टर विनोद, आई एम हियर.
थैंक यू बीना. सो प्लीज आप कुछ लफ्ज सपन के बारे में बता दें. कुड यू से अ फ्यू वर्ड्स about Sapan and how you see it going forward for a minute or two? Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I'm sorry that I joined late. We have another meeting starting very soon with students, and that's a closed meeting that brings students from South Asia together. We're just having a preliminary meeting about that. So really grateful to you for having highlighted the work that we are doing. And I think that basically, as you know, I see many friends here that I know that I've been working on India-Pakistan issues, particularly, for a long time, since the mid-1990s, along with many people who are here. And we've been going into this, and I feel like the way forward is we have to go beyond the India-Pakistan binary. They keep clashing with each other, and it's about Hindu, Muslim, India-Pakistan. It's not just about that. We have multiple identities. We have multiple ways to see things. And we have to go beyond these very rigidly defined kind of identities that have been put on us, imposed on us by the ruling elite, by the security establishments, by the corporations and all of that. And we have to embrace our multiple identities, the fluidity that South Asia, we are away when we are, and I'm very glad that I've been able to have the opportunity to be in Boston for the last 10 years, where I've been able to engage with people from around the region much more than I was able to when I was in Pakistan. And basically, I think that this is what, when we talk about to anybody, the biggest issue in South Asia is right now the India-Pakistan tensions and them stopping, the lack of trade, the lack of allowing people to meet, to travel. So when we bring in our neighbors, our friends from Sri Lanka, from Bangladesh, from Nepal, from South India, the whole thing is also north centered. And there's always this narrative of we are the same, we have the same language, we have the same music, we have the same culture. We do, but the North issue is much more, it's much more similar when it comes to the Indo-Gangetic, the North part of it. When you go beyond that, from the South, it's a different culture. East is a different culture. They don't eat the same food. They don't have the same music. But there is something that binds us. And I saw this. When I first moved to Boston a few years after I came here, at the Neiman Foundation, there were two journalists. One was from the northwest of Pakistan, Waziristan, and one was from the southernmost tip of India in Kerala. And these two and their families were the best of friends, although they had, and what brought them together was like Bollywood, food. They would share each other's food and stuff like that. But traditionally, they are not the same culture. So I think we have to, recognize that there are other people besides just the North, centric, sort of Punjabi, Urdu speaking. We have to go beyond that and look at South Asia as a region and really push that narrative. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Bina, for your perspective. So, what I would like to suggest is that with a distinguished group like this, and we have some appreciation of the diversity that exists in the region as well as the commonality. Now, of course, my personal perspectives were, as Bina said, largely related to this North-North dialogue or perspective, because I was trying to give some personal meaning to the events that have framed my life for the last over 8 decades. and to give some meaning to the background of hostility that has remained there because of the unfortunate legacies of the two nation theory and all the history that followed from that legacy. But what I see as the opportunity, and I've said it in various ways over the last half an hour or 45 minutes, is that the meeting of people with similar professional and personal considerations. Meeting of, I think I saw a very nice presentation by somebody who's a retired professional geologist, and he may even be on this panel or in this session. And he said that in geology doesn't respect boundaries, because we are taught in geology about the salt range in Pakistan, which is a very, very हम लकीरों के फकीर नहीं बनते. We don't remain prisoners of the lines. And I love those words because they express what I find in my own professional life when I meet with physicists like Dr. Parvez Hoodboy and others who have been my friends for years. When we talk about things, about the state of education, about the state of our societies, we find that we deal in a common language with all kinds of common issues and problems, in which it doesn't take more than a minute or two to establish lines of communication that are very meaningful and that we can understand and appreciate. If somebody, talks about the ill effects of climate change in Rajasthan and across the border, how long does it take for a commonality to be established? So somehow, if we can develop a means, and Sapan may be just a means of trying to establish these commonalities and these contacts, then I wish it all success, and I hope that somehow the few words that we utter in these forums will resonate across to larger groups and to larger audiences, and that is my hope for the future. And on that note, I would like to end this particular talk, and be glad to entertain questions and any other comments that people might have. Thank you very much, Subhash and Ravi, for having me on this forum.
Thank you, Vinod, for this presentation. And your personal experiences added more poignancy to the presentation. Your experiences of your mother and other relatives, so that they added a different dimension to it. And the interesting points you made about how both the two nations have become prisoners of hostility, or you talked about the dialectics of nostalgia and bitterness, which is operating in this region itself, and how the interest of state and civil society they can be diverse. And the most important point which you made about reclaiming of South Asia, and how people to people cooperation needs to be enhanced and strengthened. So I think there must be many comments and questions from friends and participants here. But before I invite other participants to join, I will request my friend and senior comrade Ravi Sinha to say to initiate the discussion. To initiate it, Ravi, please.
Thank you, Subhash, and thank you, Vinod, so much for coming to this platform and giving this very um, um, insightful talk where you gave a human dimension to the past and a hopeful dimension. My job in these initial comments after the talks in this series is to contextualize the discussion of the day with the general concerns we have here at Democracy Dialogues and NSI, and then ask the first question. Then, of course, I am sure there will be lots of questions from our distinguished audience here. Our main concern is how does the shape of democracy and shape of politics in general get impacted by the social, cultural of the society in which politics is playing out. And in particular, we have been concerned about how the Hindu-Muslim divide becomes such a force in today's India and more generally on the subcontinent. So that is why in last lecture, your lecture, and the upcoming lecture, we are focusing on the issue of partition, because partition is the most violent and largest scale even on the subcontinent, which comes out of and further reinforces the Hindu-Muslim divide that plays such a devastating role in today's politics on the subcontinent. That is the context, behind our organizing this series. The concern I have, for example, today you are speaking from US and you talked towards the end about SAPAN, which is a very welcome initiative. But I have the following about large-scale politics. Then we have to find ways, we have to understand how one can impact, whether we like it or not. To people contact is very welcome. But such efforts have been around for a while on various fora have been there, and yet the impact is marginal. We know the impact of discussions and public intellectuals and groups of intelligentsia will always be marginal, but at the understanding level, is a way out of the way politics at the larger level, in the bigger picture, they are able to malignant are able to. I was just saying that while various efforts at people-to-people contact is very welcome, at least we would. So at the bigger picture, if we what the bigger political forces should do in order to reduce the malignant effect, like with that problem that we worry about, at this forum, and many people worry about, then that mentioned at the end, said about SAPAN and other such fora at the end sounds in the paired with the bigger problem. It sounds like a statement of objectives, and with like-minded can have that among them. But how should be affected by the Indian diaspora, Indian intelligentsia, set of public intellectuals, because there are political forces in India and at others on the other side of the border who are battling this problem from a reasonably secular perspective and who are larger forces than us. So these people to people contacts will play their role, but we would like to understand how to influence the large scale politics, especially in India, that is playing out, and what attitude to take to secular forces and secular politics in India, so that the present communal fascist hegemony can be undermined. So that is our concern here at NSI, that we would like to understand the larger picture as compared to.
I think Vinod, you can please respond.
I think you have made important points, Ravi, and there is no doubt that this has stayed with me for a good part of my life, trying to understand how to put this hostility and the larger picture of political forces into some kind of context where we can understand the evolution of what has been going on for all these years. Now, one is the toxic legacy of the two nation theory that is still playing out, and is playing out in different at macro level, as we see right now. The important thing is to try and reverse the trend which some political parties, I mean, I'm of course enthused by some thing like this Bharat Jodo Yatra, etc., that is being undertaken, and this is makes us even viewing it from 10,000 miles away, gives us a sense of hope that there is a feeling that some of these more toxic legacies that we are dealing with can be reversed, can be at least partially derailed. All this talk that is emanated about genocide and about killing of minorities and so forth, that we also hear about, that there are other uh, there are other voices, there are other forces on a macro scale. My talk was more what we can do on a perhaps more micro scale, and to establish a constituency that brings out the best in people, and that talks about common issues and problems, and common issues and problems at a people to people level, especially of intellectuals and those who are opinion makers on common problems that affect and afflict everybody in the region of South Asia. So I recognize that its impact on the macro level may be somewhat small or perhaps even minimal to start with, but I think
Vinodji, sorry to cut you short, but I just wanted to quickly respond before, because I need to leave for the other meeting. So if you don't mind, I'll just respond very quickly to the question earlier that was very valid. If you don't mind, I'm so sorry to cut you short because you're making such good points and your presentation was so good. I just wanted to very quickly say that Raviji's points absolutely well taken, 100%. The thing is that Sapan is not a coalition of expatriates. Most Sapan people are actually on the ground in India, in Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Pakistan. There's very few of us. There's like 3-4 of us who are here in the States, a couple in London. But most people are on the ground and they are exactly fighting those very forces that you talked about. And I think part of our philosophy is that rather than reacting to what is being thrown at us, because I see the struggle in India as being very linked to the struggle in Bangladesh and Pakistan as well. We are fighting the same forces by different names. There's the same issues that we are all facing. violence in the name of religion, hyper-nationalist politics, silencing of dissent, disappearances, and all. We're facing the same issues. So, but that is one thing, and we have to do that firefighting. We need to keep doing that firefighting. But while that is happening, and there are a lot of people doing it, at the same time, we need to forge our own narrative and try and influence in some way the wider narrative that is happening. And that is what we are trying to do through Sapan, in the sense that we also have, if you go to the website that I shared on the group chat, there's a Sapan News Network thing there as well. So these are very small efforts, and they're a drop in the ocean. But we can only do what we can do. We cannot control what other people do. That whole philosophy of be the change, or in Islam, it is the greater jihad is the struggle within. Like, we have to start with ourselves. So what can each of us do? And then what can we do collectively? So that is what we are trying to do at Sapan. And your point is absolutely well taken. We are up against tremendous forces, and it feels really overwhelming. But I keep thinking of David and Goliath, and that is what we are. We are all like little Davids in front of this mammoth Goliath. But when we come together, then together we are stronger. The 5 fingers of one hand together. So and to not get derailed by what they are trying to push at us, to not get derailed by the narrative that they are pushing on us. So that's just what I wanted to say, and to add to that. And I'm really sorry I have to leave now, and I will catch up with the whole recording on Facebook. And we are going to have somebody, I believe Urvashi Butalia will be writing about this, about Vinodji's talk, and we will put it out on Sapan News Network. And so then that becomes like a syndicated feature that is available to use anywhere. So if you just Google search Sapan News, like our last few features have been published in several places, basically trying to go beyond the headlines. Like, you won't have regular journalists reporting about these kind of things. And like Vinodji said, hoping that these words spoken at forums like these reach wider people, which doesn't happen just through video recordings. So we are trying to report on these things also and share them out, and welcome people who would like to volunteer to write, to translate, to get it out in outlets, in email lists and whatever. So please contact us. I've shared the link on the group chat, and our contact details are there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Veena.
Vinod, you would like to complete your response?
I very much liked Beena's intervention, and I think she has put the the issues in a good context. And whatever small things be the change that you want to see. So at an individual level, of course, it is micro, but we are trying to look for visions of hope, and I think she put it in a good way. Thank you very much.
Professor Arundeep Ahluwalia has raised his hand. Can you would like to add?
Please unmute.
Yeah, I did. Namaskar, Vinodji. I'm the geologist who talked about the salt range. Yeah.
I heard your lecture, and I'm very enthused by every word that I heard. So thank you for your talk.
Thank you so much. I have a YouTube channel, Earth Talks. Lots of related issues about shared ecology, shared geoheritage, shared eco-heritage, and the potential for growth of all Himalayan ecology nations through collaboration. So I thought, let's ignore the negativity and focus on on what's done the world over. This region, I was in Peshawar for a UNESCO field meet in 1999 September, about 10 days before Musharraf took over. I had a youngster who was the son of then Vice Chancellor Qasim Jan, who talked to me at a tribal lunch, which was late rather. We had gone to Khyber Pass. He said, Uncle ji, मैंने आपसे एक बात पूछनी है. हमारे दोनों मुल्क इकट्ठे क्यों नहीं हो सकते? I was a bit scared of discussing things like that because Kargil war had just happened, and we had actually planned the trip because of Vajpayee's Lahore Yatra, and we thought 500 rupees will take us to Pakistan and we'll attend the conference. Later, the host gave us the flight because things had gone bad. I said, "Beta, why you say that?" He said, "Germany भी तो इकट्ठे हो गए जी. पहले तो कहते थे नहीं हो सकते. So if Germany's could join, why can't we join?" I said, "You have any other reason for this proposed union of India and Pakistan?" He said, "Cinema. हमारा दोनों का cinema तो एक ही है." And then he said another thing. हमारी दोनों की अगर क्रिकेट टीम इकट्ठे खेलें तो पूरी दुनिया का धुआं निकाल दें. For a kid who was hardly 15 or 16 years, for him, there was a dream. I have a feeling that generation one day will eliminate all these older generations of politicians, hate mongers, religious fanatics, etc. This side and that side both. The future belongs to that generation which wants collaboration and cooperation and friendship. So I feel that this hopelessness that kuch nahi hoga, it has not happened for 75 years, it will not happen for another 100 years. No. I think within 25 years, that generation of that boy in Peshawar will take over and knock out all these hate mongers. In fact, not a single guy I've ever met who's a Pakistani, in Pakistan or outside, who is an enemy of the Indian people. They are friends. They are the best of friends in the world. So if that cannot be ignored, that it's not visible, but that's a reality, which is a mega reality, which will always prevail in the end. Love always prevails. Commercial interest always, it's a shared interest. We will become affluent together or we'll go to dogs together. That choice of becoming affluent together, growing together, becoming a world power, and not wasting our money on weapons and military, that choice one day will be exercised. Otherwise, we are heading for huge disaster. We cannot willingly commit suicide.
Okay.
Kuch hoga.
Yes. Yeah. Irfan, engineer, has also raised his hand. Irfan, would you add your comment or question? Irfan, please.
Unmute, Irfan. Unmute.
Please.
Unmute yourself.
Please.
You are still muted. Unmute.
Please.
Unmute yourself, Irfan. You are muted.
Now we can do it. Irfan, you are muted.
Okay. Thanks. Actually, I needed permission from the host to unmute myself. I couldn't unmute myself. So thank you, Democracy Dialogues, for this wonderful talk, Vinod Uncle, and for organizing this talk. It was really very, very inspiring talk, emotional talk, which came out of personal experiences and hope. And we all are expressing that hope. But I would like to point out one thing in this entire, that partition was such a big tragedy that we have not yet come to terms with it. Indians have not come to terms with it. Pakistanis have not come to terms with it. The dispute over Kashmir, division of Pakistan into two nations, Bangladesh and Pakistan. How do we actually, immediately after partition, as we were building democracy, there was nothing like Truth and Reconciliation Commission or attempts for reconciliation ever took place. So those suppressed memories are coming back. And I think we have to deal with those memories. They haven't gone away. We think that older generation which suffered is now, very weak. The new generation will not be so bitter. But we are seeing this bitterness build or being transmitted, at least in a section. We have hopes. I have hope. And we must work for soft borders. We must work for people-to-people exchange, people-to-people relation. But that won't be possible without reconciliation. So much of violence has taken place, so much of sexual assaults have taken place, so much of historical memories are there, and we haven't come to terms with that. We haven't dealt with that. I think we need to do that, and unless, even as civil society, we need to do that. Confronting the truth that whatever took place. Sometimes I find that we are trying to cover up certain negatives, certain negative issues, and that is what, that's why people do not agree or believe us or see us as naive people. One comment of Mustafa Masalawala, again, I know him, a very naive person who was talking about Pakistan supporting terrorism, etc. There is this kind of propaganda. How to deal with it? That is the major challenge in building people-to-people relations. But I am very hopeful that we'll be able to build. We only have to have a right strategy.
Yeah, I think those are very relevant comments, Irfan, and we have all these experiences. If we are dealing with a very toxic legacy which has thrown up all these kinds of issues. So I talked a little bit about the dichotomy between the interests of a state and the interest of civil society. So the interest of a state get expressed in, like, we will not lose 1 inch of our soil or borders. Now, you can ask for 99% of the people, what difference in all these countries, what difference 1 inch of the border makes to their life. So that dichotomy is there, and the resources of the state are then directed in the context of this toxic legacy to defending every inch and every... So one question is starting the dialogues and starting the kind of efforts that these groups are making in a small way. And hopefully we can spread. One thing is that the states are established. Nobody is challenging any border. What we ask for, and I like this approach that Bina also talked about, that we go for easy borders, visa-free or visa on arrival at the border. You look at somebody's ID card or whatever, and he's free to go. People in Amritsar are free to go have lunch in Lahore if they feel like it. It's something we've been talking about, for a long time. And various groups that were established in diasporic South Asians have sort of put forward those ideas. And the other side, of course, exists. So the hope is that as we go forward, as I think the professor said also, the geological perspective, the Himalayas, and so on, all these affect our future, affect the future of the people who live there. And we have to, bring about some recognition of this amongst the peoples, and hopefully ultimately the rulers and the elites who rule the region right now. Thank you.
Yeah, we have with us Professor Swadesh Mahajan, and I will request him to share his comment, share his views. Swadesh.
Am I unmuted?
Yeah. You're audible, Swadesh.
I'm first of all awfully sorry that I just mistook the time and I joined after Vinod's talk was over. And in any case, I get to see him. Perhaps you were a year senior to me in Delhi University long ago. I vaguely remember. But anyway, so the discussion on the talk reveals something of what must have happened. I'm not going to talk about anything very serious, but probably give you a little family experience of my own. My family migrated from Pakistan in 1947. I was about 3 years old. So much of my memory of our so-called repatriation to India is essentially reconstructed from the stories that I hear, nothing that I remember. But one experience over the years, which has always fascinated me, is that all of my brothers and sisters, they're all older than me, they took the partition as something that fell to our fate and moved on. Their attitude towards Pakistan and the Muslims essentially was that of, it was no different from their attitude towards anything. But our next generation, my brothers and sisters' children, they end up being much, much more anti-Pakistani and anti-Muslim than the generation which actually had gone through the partition. And I still have not been able to understand it. I often ask them, what exactly is your basis for coming to such conclusions? And then what's even more interesting is that the generation after that, people at my age have great-grandchildren, and they actually started indifferently towards the issue of partition. They didn't have any strongly well-defined opinions even on the other community. But as, of course, I have seen them over the last 20 years, many of them would rather not care. And if they do, they really go for the stuff which will give them some kind of a patronage. And what the various parties in India have done, they all try to create their followers group by extending them direct patronage. And in fact, what has happened is that those who are able to extend the largest patronage over the longest period of time, they have succeeded in getting the ear of more and more people. So I believe that we can talk ad infinitum about the toxic effects of Pakistan, of the partition, but perhaps that is not something that we should be concentrating on, because I believe that the toxicity which should have affected the group most, in fact, they might be the least affected, and it's the others who did not have this direct experience do get affected. So it does require a certain degree of thought, is that what is our principal contradiction today? What is it that we are fighting on? We can flail ourselves constantly, our leaders screwed up this or that, but I am not sure that that is the most important issue at stake today.
I think if anybody wants to add something to it, any other comment and question from the audience, and then otherwise we can move towards Shukla Sen, please. Shukla Sen, go ahead, please.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the point that I was making, I have already posted my comments anyway. The point that I am making that, in fact, in a way corresponds to what Professor Mahajan has said. Partition, of course, plays, and the memories of partition play a major role in shaping India-Pakistan relations. But that's not all. And in fact, it is manipulated over and again. That's why it remains so important. As Ms. Sarwar has pointed out, South India has not suffered from Pakistan. Even eastern part, northeast has not suffered from Pakistan. Even that way, Maharashtra has not suffered from Pakistan. Blah blah blah. So this is one aspect. What actually matters, we must not forget that foreign policy of a state is essentially an extension and reflection of the domestic policy or the compulsions of the domestic rulers. That has to be kept. Unless we can make an impact on that politics, we of course must keep doing, as Ms. Sarwar has said in reply to my comment, that we will be doing what we can do. Absolutely sensible, no doubt about that. But at the same time, we must not forget the other part, and the other part is the state. State has a tremendous advantage in shaping the agenda. My personal experience, I don't have any memory of partition. I was born after independence. When Musharraf came here for the Agra conclave, I was in a sort of remote place. Even then, I could sense that Musharraf became a sort of hero in India. But the moment actually Sushma Swaraj backstabbed, most probably at the instigation of this Advani, and the moment the talk failed, Musharraf went back from being a hero to a villain that he had been all the time. It is the state which essentially shaped the public sentiment, opinion, and all that, and it can do it almost overnight by doing this or that. Even last election, I personally believe it was a Pulwama Balakot election, and that Balakot incident had shaped the popular sentiment in a very big way. That's not the point here. Point is this: unless we can make an impact on the state itself and state politics, policies,
Okay.
things remain where they were. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. So, any last comment from you, Vinod?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I'd just like to say that I did not touch on this, this question of separateness and the two nations and so on, and how it plays a role. But one thing is, I would just say that there are two aspects that seem to occur to me. One is the teaching of history and how it is taught, because that affects the minds of people at a young age and then persists throughout society. So in Pakistan, I believe the teaching of history, as my friends there have pointed out, starts off with something like Muhammad bin Qasim came in 632 AD and that established Pakistan. I mean, something, and then in India we hear that 800 years of slavery, that kind of notion, and maybe that is taught in the schools also now, because they kind of ideologues that control the schools. So these notions then establish certain mindsets which are then fixed in eternal hostility. And of course, I talked about the divergence between the interests of those who control the state, because once religion got established as a mark of political identity, those are the consequences that we are still living with almost 75 to 80 years later after this got established. And this is now being used to win elections, to demonize minorities and so on in India, and we see evidence of that every day. And as somebody said, yes, the state that controls and that has power can do some Pulwama Balakot episode, and that gets reported and changes people's minds and so forth immediately. And they have undoubtedly power which the civil society or the common people don't have. So one has to recognize at a quite fundamental level that if peace is to be established, then this difference between the interests of those who control the state and those in civil society has to be understood at a fairly fundamental level. So one can question, are you acting in my interest or are you acting in some other interest? When deals to spend billions and billions of rupees or dollars are spent on weaponry, and so the question can be raised. And I think I don't have hope in my lifetime that these questions will be adequately answered. But as I think the professor said, that he has hope for future generations. And we live with that hope and we try to act on that hope. And this is the only reason I talked about Sapan and so on, because it represents one of the rays of hope in an otherwise, of course, bleak environment. And we focus on the positive aspect and try to derive some hope from it. Thank you.
Yeah. I think with this note, we conclude the meeting. Thank you very much for being here, Vinod, for this meeting. And I will again remind participants that next month you do join lecture by Professor Ishtiaq Ahmed. Thank you very much. Thank you for participating and joining. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you all.